Hello my friends, and welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. In this one, I want to take a little time and talk about something that feels like it has been an endless ongoing discussion in my Twitch chat every single time that I stream Tarkov this wipe. And that is the economy, and how the hyper-inflated, super rich Bitcoin billionaire vibes of this Tarkov wipe has kind of sucked the fun out of the game a little bit. Fundamentally, I think the gameplay loop of Tarkov just does not work properly when players have the ability to rake in millions of rubles per day while AFK. The economy and the gameplay loop of Tarkov are extremely codependent, and when money becomes easier to make outside of the raid than inside of the raid, the incentives for players to even participate in raids starts to fade, and eventually it kind of disappears completely. To start this discussion off, I want to begin with why I think a cash-rich economy in Tarkov just inherently clashes with the gameplay loop of the survival extraction FPS, which Tarkov essentially created to begin with. At the core of Tarkov's entire gameplay loop, I think there are a few really simple fundamentals that made this game so addicting for so many people. First, there was an ever-present risk versus reward calculation that had to be made around pretty much every decision that you made both in and out of raid. Everything from what you brought in for your loadout to how you moved around the map, what zones you looted, what fights you took, when and where you extracted, they were all kind of surrounded by decisions of whether it was worth the risk. Bringing more supplies or a better gun or better armor meant risking more of your stash value, but you were rewarded with potentially a better chance of surviving. Or you could take the risk of entering a raid with cheaper gear for the potential reward of making much higher returns on investment after a successful extraction. When moving through the map, you can take the risk of heading straight for the best loot hotspots to try and load up on value quickly. Or you can go slow and hit side areas for a lower profit but a higher chance of a safe extraction. When you heard gunshots in the distance or saw players running around, there was a choice you have to make between chasing that fight or avoiding it. Taking the fight means risking your entire loadout, but winning that fight rewards you with gear, loot, and map control that might make the rest of the raids safer or simply more profitable. But I think fundamentally all of these risk versus reward decisions are only interesting when what you might lose and what you might gain are both valuable to you. When one or both of those are out of sync, suddenly the decisions you make in raid begin to lose weight, and both the risk and the reward quickly start to lose value. When the game throws money at players like it does right now with 1 to 1.5 million rubles per Bitcoin that's farmed idly in the hideout, there's no longer any real risk to bringing better gear, so that eliminates one choice in the decision-making process. When you reach the point where you have a deep well of cash reserves to infinitely replace your gear, you no longer really need to make choices about surviving a raid to profit or to replace lost equipment. So that affects how you approach moving around the map and your decisions about whether or not to take fights or to retreat and play it safe. When the risk of death no longer really carries any weight to it besides a hit to your ego and the inconvenience of a loading screen, you kind of stop making decisions and start running on autopilot a little bit. And then to add insult to injury, the wealthier you get in Tarkov, the less exciting it becomes to actually find any good loot. It should be exciting to find a graphics card or a LEDX or a nice gun or a Bitcoin. Those goosebumps when you picked up a LEDX and suddenly your entire objective was to survive that raid and put it on the flea market were unmatched by any of Tarkov's competition, and it was truly an addictive feeling. In current Tarkov, however, many players have reached such a critical mass of wealth where effectively nothing they find in raid is really exciting anymore. In fact, I think it's at a point where looting is almost more of an inconvenience after a certain point, because the time spent searching containers and opening doors just to add more rubles on top of our giant pile of rubles is kind of self-defeating. When the most effective way to upkeep your supplies is to run raids to stack money to then buy everything you need on the market, eventually you're going to simply reach a point where you no longer need to make any more money, which means you no longer need to run any raids, really. Tarkov kind of becomes the snake eating its own tail. As your PMC becomes wealthier, the risk versus reward starts to become less exciting. When you're no longer under pressure to take the risk, encounters in raid become less rewarding, and any reward you do get feels less and less thrilling. I think this transitions nicely into my second point about the current Tarkov economy, which is that I think PvP suffers immensely when all players are just loaded up with so much Bitcoin cash that money is no longer an issue. Ideally, I think PvP in Tarkov is at its best when every encounter has value to it, whether that be the value of that other player's gear and loot, or the value of map control and safety after you eliminate a threat. When the economy is in a healthy spot, there's a lot of incentive for players to actually move, because they want to be the first one to secure hotspots on the map and the first ones to get that loot. When players are actually thirsty for the contents of a locked room, it creates a natural PvP hotspot that kind of directs the action of a raid and creates really intense battles for map control and a race to be the first person to those hotspots. But this only works when the loot is actually meaningful to players. And when you can pull in 3 to 5 million per day just from idle farming in the hideout, suddenly a 600k LEDX pretty much isn't worth risking death for anymore. Instead of actively fighting each other to acquire the loot, PvP instead becomes a really static game of stopping the other person from getting the loot. You don't actually care about the loot, you just want to punish the other person for trying to get to it. Rather than pushing into a hotspot to take fights and secure the area, you start to see people sitting outside of these areas and exit camping people after they loot the whole thing in silence. You no longer care about getting the stuff that they might put in their container, you only really care about killing them for the sake of killing them. PvP stops being about profit or map control or gaining supplies and advantage, and it starts being basically about griefing each other. We don't care about the loot, we don't care about securing the hotspot, we don't care about the gear that player has. We just want to stop the other person from having fun, essentially. And then even when you do have a really nice PvP fight, say you wipe out a 3-man squad as a solo player, you're then faced with the awkward prospect of possibly not even really gaining anything from that encounter. Sure, they might have some nice gear, but you don't want to take it because the inconvenience of being over-encumbered isn't worth it when you can just buy all of that equipment with your infinite rubles. Sure, they might have some valuable hideout supplies or nice meds in their bag, but really, do you need more stims when you already have 10 med cases stacked full in your stash? Do you really need the hideout items when you could just pick up a couple low-weight, valuable items, sell them, and buy it on the flea market? Yes, you will go through the motions of picking up their loot, but the excitement just isn't there because you already have so much that death doesn't hurt and survival is just going to add more to the ever-growing pile of stuff that you have collecting dust in your stash. Now for my final point that I'd like to make in this video, I want to talk about how a hyper-rich economy makes Tarkov's huge arsenal of weapons and equipment feel much less exciting to interact with. While opinions may vary, I personally think the game is just more interesting when we're faced with meaningful decisions about how we should use our resources. When you have 3 million rubles, the difference between a 200k loadout and a 600k loadout feels meaningful. That choice between taking meta attachments for the extra 5% recoil reduction versus a budget build that takes a bit more finesse actually means something. You might be able to win more fights with the expensive gear, but if you die, it will be more painful to replace it. So you actually go through a thought process about what to take and why. When you have 30 million rubles, that choice kind of ceases to exist. There's no longer an incentive to use anything besides the best items available to you. There's no reason to not bring the best ammo, to have the best armor and the best stims, and there's no reason to really interact with anything the game has except for these top items. For a certain amount of time, yes, that's a great feeling. But over time, it just steadily erodes any reasons you have to interact with a massive percentage of the stuff in Tarkov. In my opinion, Tarkov is simply more fun when more of the game's equipment is relevant. When your personal economy has dips and spikes to it, and you go through phases of being rich and running meta gear, and then after a couple bad deaths are forced to squeak together a budget loadout to recoup your losses, that's exciting. That is riding the roller coaster of Tarkov. It's just not as fun to me when I don't feel any pressure from the game to run anything except the best guns, best attachments, etc. In some ways, I actually think being hyper rich in Tarkov even kind of kills the cool factor of running good gear altogether over time. When a fully kitted M4 and good armor, expensive night vision, and a big backpack is a luxury, you honestly feel cool taking it out. You get excited to upgrade your gear to finally put together a real slick loadout and feel like an apex predator in Tarkov. But once you reach the point where money is no longer an issue, and you can just build more and more loadouts, they don't even really feel cool anymore. They just become the standard, almost a requirement to compete against other players. And this also applies to the loot that you pick up from other PMCs that you might kill in a raid as well. When metagear is so prevalent that every single person you kill has a 6x scope, a suppressor, a 60 rounder, class 5 armor, and AP ammo with a super juiced gun, it's not exciting to loot it anymore. It's just more shit to accumulate in your stash. At the end of the day, there is no magic bullet solution to these problems, and for some I think they don't even see it as a problem. There's a fine line in loot games where things can be accessible but not omnipresent, and I think that is where Tarkov truly shines. I feel like we kind of had that balance for a long time, but this current wipe really broke the economy wide open and has gotten to a point of almost comical wealth for the average player, where you can easily hit 50 million plus rubles without even really playing or caring about your survival rate at all. In any case, I'm really hoping that the next wipe we have will be a chance for BSG to go hands-on with the economy again and get us back to a spot where survival, smart choices, and resource management are at the forefront, and we're not all just so rich that we can buy top-tier loadouts in unlimited quantities. I really miss the Tarkov roller coaster. I miss the decision-making and tough choices that come from actually wanting and needing the stuff that you find in raid. I miss the thrill of taking down a juicer with a budget loadout and the thrill of stomping budget loadouts with a meta build, and honestly both of those things are kind of gone right now. I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and if you have anything to add to it, feel free to drop a comment. I try and reply to all of them, and I really do love hearing your opinions to get me out of my echo chamber. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got a link to my Twitch channel in the description if you want to drop by the stream and say hi, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City, everyone.